Hello and welcome everyone. Good afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you're dialing in from. Thank you very much for attending this webinar on delivering effective tutoring into schools. I'm Will, I'm one of the founders of Bramble, and also kindly joining us today is Johnny Manning from Manning's Tutors.
Hi everyone.
So thank you for squeezing us in, Johnny. It's a very busy time for everyone at the moment, so we really appreciate it.
Not at all. Glad to take part. Thanks for inviting us.
So the reason I asked Johnny to join us is he founded Manning's Tutors, and they have specialised in working with schools. They're a private tutoring company, but they deliver the overwhelming majority of their tuition into schools. I think over the years now, Johnny, you've done around about 150,000 hours of work.
Yeah, probably around 150,000 if you're counting student hours, because some of it's one-to-one, some of it's group tuition. It's probably around 65,000 tutor hours, so the amount of tuition that our tuition team has delivered. So.
Either way, lots of tuition,
yeah.
So we thought Johnny would be a great person to answer some questions, share some thoughts on what they've learned in working with schools over the years. And actually, a nice way of starting, I thought, would be discussing some of the case studies I know you've shared with me, Johnny, over the years, kind of really measuring the impact you've had in schools. So thought we'd start by talking about the Harris Falconwood example, which I think was sort of quite a traditional block of tutoring you delivered over, I think, 10 weeks or so.
Yeah. Yes, Harris Falconwood, one of our long-serving relationships with this school, and like you say, a really standard scheme, one that's adopted by many schools and academies that we work with, where you're looking for some extra tuition for the pupils, so you book in a session of after-school tuition, so 3 o'clock till 5 o'clock, you've got pupils staying after school. We've sent a team of tutors down there. We're providing maths, English, science, and what we were doing in Falconwood was we had pupils staying for the full 2 hours after school, having 1 hour with one subject, and then moving across and having a second hour in a different subject. So getting this 2-hour intervention. I think it was Tuesday evenings we used to do this. In fact, with Falconwood, we were doing it as a mix of face-to-face and online. So we had the people going down there in person, but because it was a slightly harder school for us to reach, we're using Bramble to deliver some of that tuition as well. So fully integrated between the two. 10-week scheme, I think we had groups of 3 to up to 6 pupils, and really nicely the school were fantastic in sharing the data on where the pupils were at when we began this 10-week scheme, and where they were at when this 10 weeks was over. So we managed to track the journey and the impact that 10 hours of small group tuition would have. It varied between the subjects, but in every single subject, over half of the pupils made at least 1 grade's progress. I think English Lit, the pupils were going up, 72% of them made more than a grade's progress. And then over about 15 to 20% were making 2 grades progress within a 10-week scheme. I quite crassly sort of worked out, we looked at the number of grades that the school had moved on because of this tuition. It was a £2,500 scheme, and they managed to get 50 grades of progress out of it. So I said back to the school afterwards, like, you paid £44 per grade there.
Pretty good result, that.
And said, £44 will get you 1 extra grade. I think that's very, very good value for money there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a brilliant example of how that block of tutoring, a bit of a mix of online and offline, can deliver some really good results. I know the other one we spoke about, which was a bit different in terms of its intensity, but also even more rigorously measured, was the scheme you did at Contingency.
Yeah, Contingency was a really interesting one. It doesn't exist as a school anymore. It's been swallowed up by Harris. It's now Harris St. John's Wood. But they had some real issues over their time. I think they had some issues with a head that was later struck off. But we came in when they were looking at this cohort of pupils in January. The entire year group was really struggling with maths, and it was set to be a disaster if it carried on to the exam. So the head, at the time, Alex Atherton, really forward-thinking headmaster, principal, put in place this intensive program that began in January of the entire year group sitting a GCSE maths mock paper on a Monday afternoon. We took those mock papers home for the school and marked every single one overnight. So they had about 140 pupils, I think it was. I can't quite remember, but we marked all these papers, did a full QLA, so analysed where the pupils had been struggling and what they were getting right, and gave this to the school Tuesday morning. And what they did then was they identified the 30 pupils, the 30 weakest pupils in terms of progress, not in terms of attainment, but the ones that had failed to sort of make progress since the previous mock exam. And those 30 received half an hour of tuition every single day for the next fortnight from Manning's. So we had some tutors that went in full time, sat in the library, and just every half an hour a new child arrived for them to work with. What we were able to do, because we'd taken this mock paper and thoroughly analysed it, is identify which topics those individual pupils were struggling with that the rest of the class weren't. Whereas something that the entire class struggled with, we fed that to the school and said, look, you might want to readdress this in your maths lesson. But where it was something that there was a gap in the learning for an individual child that the teacher wouldn't be able to catch up on, that's what we said to the tutors, like, this is where you need to focus your attention in this 2 weeks. And so the 2 weeks went by, you had 9 hours of tuition across that period. Is that right? No, 4.5 hours, excuse me. And then the entire year group sat a test again. So you had the cohort of 30 pupils that we had been drilling, essentially, and you had the other 100 of odds who hadn't had any of such intervention. And we would mark these papers once again, and I'd sit nervously plugging the numbers into a spreadsheet saying, oh, geez, I hope that our tutors have had the impact that I've always said they would. And every single fortnight, we repeated this 3-4 times. We were outstripping, I think it was about 145%. So actually, I've got it written down here. The first one was 145% impact. The second one, 262% impact. The pupils we worked with made 1.5 grades progress compared to the pupils. The school liked those stats, and so increased it from 30 pupils up to 40 pupils. And we just continued this all the way to the exams. But I sort of got a bit over-technical about it. I mean, I did a maths degree, and so can't help myself but sort of dig down into the details. I thought, well, hang on, we're kind of cheating here, because we're drilling these kids on the 5 topics that they're struggling with, and then they're just walking back into exam, and just, of course, they're going to smash those 5 topics and get some cheap points. But I looked into it in more detail and realised that actually, because it was going calculator paper, non-calculator paper in these exam series, the topics we were drilling them on weren't even coming back up. And so the only thing we concluded with this, and we concluded this with the school, was just that their overall confidence in maths was improving there. And the school said, you know, you could tell the pupils we've been working with, because they were the ones that were sat filling the entire hour and a half, you know, having a go at every question rather than sitting there and going, like, I don't get maths, so I'm giving up. That was really, yeah, wonderful to see that it wasn't just some cheap points, but we were just improving their overall sort of approach to mathematics and their feeling of confidence. So, yeah, that was a wonderful scheme. Lovely to have a control group to compare to. Not often you get presented with such a good statistical opportunity as that one.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really nice example for a few different reasons, isn't it? That first, as you say, is that you're able to zoom in on those specific topics and deliver some really focused intervention. But super interesting to note that general performance improved as a result, which is the beauty of this, is that extra one-to-one small group support raises confidence kind of across the bar, which is why I think it's so exciting.
Yeah, I had a really interesting comment from a principal the other day. I was doing a podcast with qualified tutor, and she really hit it nail on the head. She said that the tuition, the one-to-one or the small group tuition, gives pupils a chance to experience success, and it gives pupils a chance to link hard work and effort with an output, with some sort of attainment, with understanding that maybe they're missing out on in the class, especially if they're the sort of people who fall into the back of the class, struggling to understand the concept as it's going. They don't manage to make that connection. But you put them in a one-to-one or a small group session, which is paced, perfectly at their level, And they can go from, you know, not understanding how to do an analysis of any sort of English text, learning the skills of how to do that, and in the second half applying them and suddenly realizing what they've achieved in that 1 hour. And that then propagates through the rest of their time in the school. So the impact of that 1 hour tuition just stretches out for the whole week, which is, yeah, really wonderful. It's really, yeah, insightful comment from as a principal of Lambeth Academy.
Yeah, I guess that cross subject, right? It's just that general faith in learning, which is why, yeah, that's a super powerful example.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, I think it is. Yeah, any single subject you could go in and you can have that work in English, and suddenly you'll realise that you can go into a geography lesson or a history lesson and feel more comfortable analysing the text and writing an essay response to it. So, yeah, the impact definitely goes way beyond that single hour.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully that sort of sets the scene nicely, everyone. I've seen a few questions come in. Do sort of keep them coming as we go. We'll probably pick up most of them towards the end. So if it does get missed as we go along, don't be afraid to ask it again when we get to the sort of Q&A at the end. I thought what we'd do now is just talk a bit kind of more specifically about some of the things you've learned in working with schools, Johnny, and some of your tips. So at risk of oversimplifying it, what's sort of the number one thing that you would say has really been key to the success you've had with schools?
Yeah, so I think the key to it is building that relationship with the school. You know, there can sometimes be a little bit of friction, and the reason that tuition necessarily isn't embraced by all schools at the moment as a sort of complement to the learning and to the educational journey for pupils is because maybe they're seen as being something that's going to like pull in a different direction. It's firmly been my belief for the past 12 years that we're all working towards the same goal here, which is for the pupils to make the progress they deserve and get the absolute best results that they can in their GCSEs and their A-levels and move on to the best futures possible. So it's about building that relationship, understanding the school's individual challenges, understanding why it is they're looking to bring tuition in. What are the barriers to the pupils' learning in the schools? Yeah, it might be that it's poor prior attainment, that they've managed to get through primary school without learning to read and write effectively. It could be that there's a sort of lack of ambition. We worked with the Isle of Sheppey Academy, and that was the first thing they said, that no one sort of dreamt of going to university. There was no ambition coming from the pupils, and I think they even said a couple of the teachers weren't sort of helping on that thing. So you've got to understand what the challenges are in the school that you're working with, and you need everyone on board. So we try and make sure that our tutors are speaking to the teachers of the pupils that they're supporting, so that they can share any gaps in learning. So the teachers can come in at the beginning and say, look, here's the topics that I could really do with some help with these children, and I can do some help with those topics with those children. And we're then feeling like a bit of a support team for the team, that we're plugging the gaps that I think I said earlier that they don't have the time to fill in class because they're either moving on to new material or covering something that's not being understood by an entire class. So making sure you're building that relationship. I don't think this is something that can be done in sort of just an online, just a booking form. You need to have the agency and the principal and the senior leadership team, the heads of department and the heads of year, all talking and all understanding each other and moving in that same direction for the benefit of the pupils.
There's actually a really interesting question that's just come in here, from Lena, asking, if you find the student has little ambition for the material, how do you inspire them?
So that's one of the questions we ask in our interviews for our tutors, because we feel that that's one of the key points for helping people to make progress, is overcoming that barrier of, I don't want to learn, or I don't like maths, I don't like English. What's the point of me learning Shakespeare? Because this is old language, no one talks like that these days. And so that is the question that we ask our potential tutors, and kind of base who we take on how inspiring their response to that is. Our answer to that has been the type of tutor that we've used. We recruit undergraduates and recently graduated students to use as tutors who are quite close in age to the pupils they're working with. So they may be 5-6 years ahead in their journey, and because of that, and because of the selection process we have of finding those people that are inspiring, they can kind of be seen as role models and mentors as well as just educators. So yeah, they understand the stresses and strains that these pupils are going through. They've learned the tips and tricks for getting through these exams, and hopefully, they're able to help those kids overcome that friction between like, oh, I can't work hard and be cool at the same time. And suddenly we send in a tutor who's quite on point, but also absolutely loves astrophysics.
Yeah.
And,
wasn't there that guy who used to longboard to his physics tutoring?
Yeah, so he would turn up, park his longboard, and then wax lyrical about astrophysics. I've just seen Auntie saying, oh, people have personalities as well. Absolutely, we do. We actually recruit people of all ages. We ask our tutors to be youthful, and by youthful, I don't believe that a number can be placed on that. It's all about sort of your outlook, your energy, your enthusiasm for a topic. We take on tutors of all ages, Anthony, and I completely agree with you there. But where we advertise in the universities, and therefore have a lot of undergraduates and recently graduated tutors.
But I think the key thing here, which is universal across ages, is this idea of a different voice, right? That the student is having things explained in a different way by a different person, and that might just be the thing that helps them break through.
Yeah, and that's, I've said about getting everyone on board and sort of like having a hearts and minds project at the beginning of a tuition program. I've come across some teachers before who have said, why is it that your guys are being paid to come in after school and work with these kids? Why can't we be paid overtime? I was like, I'm not quite sure why you want to work overtime. Teachers have worked hard enough as it is. I thought there would be nice relief that someone else would be looking after these kids from 3 till 5 for them. But also, that idea of a different voice. They've had their teacher in the daytime who has approached a topic from one angle, and then they have someone else, whether it's one of our undergrads, whether it's a retired professor, whether it's someone who's just pursued a career as a lifelong tutor. It's someone who's coming at it from a completely different angle. And it's that different voice, and that may be the thing that just helps this pupil understand it by seeing it from a different viewpoint, or just understanding a different person's take on the world. This person presumably isn't working in a school. They might have been working in the city or following a career in engineering and then taking up tuition in addition to that or after that. You just get another viewpoint coming for these pupils. I think that's really powerful. Yeah,
absolutely. I guess we had to boil it down. It's that relationship between the school and the agency and the tutors as well, and that feedback loop, I guess, between the tutors and the teachers. It's not just before the first session; it's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah, completely. So we need to get as much information from the school before we start as possible, so that we're coming in on the front foot. There's no point us coming in and spending the first hour trying to figure out where the gaps of the learning are. The school, if they're doing things well, we'll know exactly where they are. So we want that information at the beginning. And equally, we then have a responsibility to be feeding back information to the school to say, yes, look, well, in the first 3 hours, we feel we've plugged those gaps. What else would you like us to work on? Or 7-8 hours in, well, hang on a second, this pupil is really struggling to grasp this. We can continue with it if you want. Do you mind if we use these 15 hours just getting the pupil to understand the basics of this subject, the basics of essay writing or the basics of algebra or whatever it might be in the particular subject? It's definitely a two-way relationship. But then the thing we really ask for is that feedback from the school at the end when we've finished the program and they've done another mock exam in the school. Please do get us that data so that we can measure the impact of that particular tuition team, and especially for NTP, that's going to be vitally important. I think everyone would like to see this having a legacy after this year. So we really want to make sure that we're analysing all the work and the 76 million if it can be shown to have some superb impact, then we can ask the government to keep on sort of supporting pupils and schools and agencies with this sort of funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that measurement side of things is super exciting, because hopefully we're going to see all sorts of different models funded, and there will be a huge data set showing that sometimes one-to-one is way more effective, other times small groups work better, sometimes online's better, sometimes in person's better. Different methods will work in different situations, but the idea that that data set should hopefully be generated over the next year, and can be looked at quite rigorously. I think that between you as a mathematician and me as a scientist, it's quite an exciting proposition, right?
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, you've got some great new data analysis tools coming in Bramble that we've been working on in advance of NTP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that assessment side of things is something we're looking at in the platform. So measuring after every session, what was student engagement and comprehension like, asking the student and asking the tutor, because as I think we've discussed before, Johnny, just moving confidence up is a pretty good result in and of itself for a lot of students, especially when you consider the knock-on effect that has. But we're also looking at some of that kind of more rigorous exam style assessment as well, so that you've got that full data set of this block of tutoring was really effective, and this block maybe wasn't so much. And I think what's really interesting for us is when that tutoring is being delivered online, you can cross-reference that data against all the engagement data that's generated in a Bramble session. So you can look at a block of tutoring and say that this was a really successful block, and it turns out that at the start, the tutor tended to speak a bit more, and as the 15 hours went on, the student voice increased, and the student also engaged with the pen tool more, and they uploaded more resources. And you look at that and you go, and that delivered really good results. And over 100, 1,000 sessions, we'll start finding those signals of what a good set of tutoring looks like, which can then be used to kind of nudge tutors in the right direction ongoing, which I think is sort of the holy grail, really.
Absolutely. It'd be really exciting to link, people's self-evaluation of how well they say they understand the subject and how confident they feel, and see the correlation to actual results if there's assessment pieces on here as well. It'd be lovely to know if, as confidence improves, as confidence improves, do results improve, or is it, like sort of my attempts at many sports, so my confidence goes up, but I don't get any better at them, perhaps.
Yeah, well, we'll wait and see. This time next year, we should know the answers to a few more of these questions, eh? So I think that those kind of points around relationship, are true whether you're delivering that tutoring in person in the school or whether you're delivering it online. I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about some of the differences between kind of online and in-person delivery in the school. And I guess one of the things we talked about the other day was kind of the importance of contingency planning in both of those contexts, and how that looks a bit different. And whilst that's kind of less exciting maybe than talking about all the positive stuff around progress, it's really useful practical advice. So I think we could spend a bit of time talking about that. So I guess in terms of when you've got tutors going to schools to deliver sessions, what are some of the things that I guess have surprised you over the years, and some of the contingency plans you've now got in place to help things run a bit more smoothly?
Well, yeah, there's plenty that can go wrong with sending a tutor into a school. I mean, as long as you get your ducks in a row, you can sort of mitigate most of them. One of the key things is the tutor turning up at the school and receptionist not knowing where they're supposed to be going, and so you've got a kid sat in the class at one end of the school and a tutor sat in a reception room and no learning taking place. So we learned that one pretty early on, just making sure that the information gets all the way down to that sort of gatekeeper, as it were. You've got issues about attendance. Obviously, you've got potentials for the students not to show up. So we kind of like to make sure that there's a backup plan in place at school. And obviously, 3-to-1 is quite nice because you've got a good chance, 66% chance that at least one of those kids is going to be there, right? So a lesson can still take place even if there's a couple of pupils absent, either through illness or of course, they're in the school somewhere and haven't left their class to come and attend the session. Of course, if you're doing one-to-ones, or even you've got a group of pupils who attendance is an issue, again, asking the school to maybe have a backup. They've got that tutor there. Presumably, a cancellation policy is going to mean that their school is going to have to pay for them. We hate charging for a lesson that doesn't take place. Our tutors hate charging for a lesson that doesn't take place. So having someone else that they can just jump on in and work with, and there's usually, once we've got a scheme up and running in a school, there's usually a lot of pupils that are looking over there going, oh, I want some of that support. Why can't I ask them questions? So it usually becomes quite easy just to grab a kid and go, hey, there's a spare tutor. Do you want to use them? That's on the pupil side, of course. There are tutor absences as well. You have tutors that are ill, and obviously we've got issues around COVID-19 coming up, where people are going to have to isolate for 14 days at a very short notice. So what plans do you have in place to cover for that? With some of the schemes we've run in the past, where they're particularly sort of pressing schemes perhaps, or there's not much room for manoeuvre, we've had a check-in process for our tutors. So if the scheme was running at 9 AM, at 7:30 in the morning, we have tutors just hitting a button on an app or sending a message saying, look, I'm awake, I'm on my way to the school, don't worry. And we have some covers waiting on standby just in case someone's fallen in on the night, or their gran is seriously ill, or we had someone who did message one morning and said, I've got to attend my cat's funeral. I wasn't prepared for that one.
Unusual.
Yeah, I don't think cat funerals was going to be part of my working career. So yeah, having some covers on standby. And now obviously online, getting someone to step in and cover is a lot easier, because they don't have to factor in the travel time. You can have a sort of a team of covers sitting in one location and just ready to pick up on any lesson. We don't like to cover too much, of course. A really key part of tuition is building that relationship with your pupil and sort of helping them through that journey, whether it's a year-long scheme, a term-long scheme, or the 15-hour schemes that NTP are requesting to be put in place this year. But yeah, you do need to have contingency plans there, and online certainly makes that a darn sight easier than worrying about sort of throwing someone in a taxi. Southeast London has always been horrendous for us, having to rely on Southeast trains. We have an implicit understanding of City Mapper, of Uber, some taxi services around that area. So the train's suddenly down, and we've got 9 tutors that we need to ship across the school. So Bramble, unfortunately, has taken the money out of Canon cars.
we won't cry too many tears about Uber, at least.
Yeah, so these are a number of the things you need to sort of be concerned about. I think with private tuition, a tutor absence isn't always the worst thing in the world. Most families in private tuition are happy to just say, oh, the tutor's ill, skip a week, no worries. In a school, it's a very different scenario, because the school will be expecting your tutor to be responsible for those pupils for that hour. And if your tutor isn't there, then they've suddenly got to find something to do with these pupils. And that can be an issue. So you have sort of more concerns around attendance to worry about than a private tuition agency perhaps might. Yeah,
I think, as you say, online, certainly when it's getting people between A and B, just solves all those problems, doesn't it? Yeah. It kind of logistically simplifies it. I saw a good question earlier, though, actually, relating to online, asking about firewalls and the importance of checking that with schools in advance. So I know we've done it enough time between the two of us over the years now that we've got a pretty clear process in place in terms of just providing schools with the information they need to make sure their firewalls all set up. But I think you run a test session as well, just to confirm that 100% is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. We call these tasks kettle boilers in our offices. The things you set going at the earliest opportunities, so that they can be sort of happening in the background while you're getting everything else running. And so when we get a request from a school, while we're out there building the tuition team for them and getting this in place, at the same time, we'll have someone in our office speaking with their IT department, just getting these checks done, so that they are out of the way as quickly as possible. And we know for sure that when that tutor is ready to teach the pupil, they're not going to have any issues, because if they're sat down, ready to learn, excited about the start of their scheme, and then suddenly they can't hear each other, that's going to sort of be detrimental to how this scheme is going to be viewed by them. So yeah, I think you guys produced for us a lovely sort of tech test sheet that we can send across to the IT department of the school. They run these tests, send us screenshots either to verify that it's fine, or in many instances to say, oh look, there's a firewall that's blocking the sound. I think the sound is usually the issue from being communicated. They've then got an easy walkthrough on how they get those firewalls taken down. And then we would schedule a demo lesson with them just to make sure that it is all operating smoothly. And we've always found that so long as those tech tests and that demo lesson take place, then when it comes to the actual lesson, there's never been any issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key thing, as you say, there is get that in place in advance, and then come the start of the tutoring, it's all going to go swimmingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think one of the other things that would be good to talk about is I guess some of the benefits of online in that setting. So we've obviously covered simplifying some of the logistics around getting tutors into the schools, but in terms of the actual delivery of the lessons, the recordings, all that sort of stuff, what have you found has worked well?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so much to the online tuition that isn't available in a face-to-face setting that we always describe it as being completely equally valuable to face-to-face. I think you probably describe it as being slightly more valuable than face-to-face tuition, but you've got a slightly biased opinion on this because you've got, I mean, the ease of dropping in resources and just grabbing something new. Perhaps if you're face-to-face and you brought something along and the kid says, actually, I did this mock paper last week, or we've moved on from studying that text right now, we're on this one. Well, it's a bit too late, you're there and that's the only resource you brought with you. But in the online setting, you're a few clicks away from grabbing something else and dropping it in and working on that. But then I think the most powerful part of it is the lesson recordings. Taking everything you've spoken about, I think you guys cut out all the ums and ahs, so a 1 hour waffle session turns into a 40-minute concise recording where you sound like you know what you're talking about for the entire 40 minutes. You never pause for thought.
We'll have to run this through it afterwards.
I know. My wife accused me. She said, I know when you're on a call because I hear you humming a lot. Now I'm really conscious of it. There we go. Yeah, those recordings are totally so valuable for the pupil that a year later they can sit there and think, oh, when did we cover that topic? When did we do quadratic equations? And your search facility is awesome. They can type in quadratics, and it'll list all the lessons that they spoke about that subject. And not only the lesson they spoke about it, but drop you to the minute in that lesson that it was being discussed. And how often do you sort of think, oh, I covered this with my tutor back in March. I wish I could remember it. And that lesson is lost to lost to history at that point, but not with online tuition, not with Bramble, where you can find out, revisit what you're talking about, and refresh. And that revision. I mean, I sort of passed every single exam I've ever done because of good revision technique, not because of, unfortunately, applying myself as much as I could during the lessons, but drilling at the end and sort of revisiting everything in an effective manner, I think is a real key to passing exams, and having those lesson recordings makes that so much easier. Yeah,
and I think actually we had one of the schools we were working with. I was kind of at the start of this year, which feels like a long time ago. But we were running some pilots using Bramble to actually record lessons in the classroom, so that the 30 students were still in the classroom, but the teacher had Bramble running on the interactive whiteboard for the lesson recordings. And then the thing that they were really excited about was that for some students, a textbook can be quite intimidating and can put them off, really. Trying to find exactly what they're looking for in the right place at the right time. The idea that they've got this search bar, which we all spend our lives sort of living in, that they can go to, and it returns the exact thing they covered, the exact way they covered it with their tutor, really helps to drive engagement with those recordings.
Yeah, and I think when you introduced this idea of teachers recording lessons, I was like, finally, there's a use for an electronic whiteboard. Because until that point, I hadn't seen why so much had been spent on them across the country when everyone was just using them as a regular old whiteboard or chalkboard, essentially. So, yeah, using them to record the lessons and allowing pupils to go back and revisit them, think is an awesome use of the tech. And I think we've got a few tutors that even when they go face to face, they deliver the lesson on an iPad using Bramble, and then again they've got the benefits of the lesson recordings and allowing the pupils to search back, and we can even drop in and check out how well the tutor is doing their job, and that's a really cool part of this as well. The safeguarding, it's having all these lessons recorded. Sadly, in the past, we've had some false accusations made by pupils against our tutors that have taken many staff hours, both from us, from the school, from even the local authority to investigate. And as we found out that it was indeed just a purely false accusation that jeopardised a tutor's potential livelihood, which was very scary. Of course, with lesson recording, you could have dropped in and had a look and gone, well, no, actually, the tutor never said anything along those lines in a couple of minutes. I know for schools, one school that we were running a scheme with back in March, when we pivoted everything from face-to-face onto online, we used to provide them with a link to every single lesson that's happening, and they would have a teacher who did a virtual learning walk. So they would just drop into one class, drop into another one, drop into another one, and just check the conduct of those sessions and the content of those sessions. So yeah, there's many uses for it.
Yeah, I think that visibility is hugely valuable, isn't it? And we've always talked in the past about the kind of two sides of the coin that your searchable lesson recordings give you. One being revision, and that's kind of where we focused our energy building search around that, because we were so excited by it as a tool to have helped take online tutoring to the next level, really. We never want to view it just as a substitution for what was happening in person. The exciting thing is, what more can we do? That's behind our drive to build that functionality. But as you say, at the same time, hugely valuable from a safeguarding perspective, because it means you've got that single source of truth. And the searchability means you can find it as well. A 50-hour block of tutoring, if the student says something at the end, if those recordings aren't searchable, you might as well not have them, because who's sitting there watching the 50 hours of lesson recordings to find the point that something came up? Being able to search those makes it a far more useful tool. And then I think the final thing we're quite excited about in that context relates back to that point we started with, which is this link between the teacher and the tutor, and the teacher having visibility of what the tutor's working on. Now, everyone's time poor, the teachers in particular, and I think that's where the session synopses are really exciting, because they give you that at a glance view of exactly what was covered in any session that the teacher can just look at and go, oh yeah, so they did human biology this week, plant biology last week, and this one over here, they did reaction equilibriums in chemistry, just by quickly glancing at something. I think that we're very excited about in the context of the NTP to see how that's received.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that feedback loop we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? The teacher says, these are the things I would like covered. And we talked about our tutors saying, look, I've covered these, and that's saving resources at our end, because the tutor, rather than having to type up a lesson report and say, this is what we did, you've got those synopses automatically detecting what you were working on and linking that to the stated goals that you had at the beginning of the tuition scheme. So that's really exciting. I mean, that's only a recent launch for you guys, right?
Yeah, well, so we've had the synopses in place for quite a while now. Recently, we launched the smart subject detection, which is using AI to automatically detect the subject taught in any given session. So that just helps make those synopses even richer, because you always know what subjects being discussed, and it just makes the page a bit richer as well. We color them accordingly. And I was actually chatting to someone the other day who had an interesting perspective on that library of lesson recordings, which was, they often find that students come to them and say, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I'm rubbish. I don't know anything. And they point them at that session library, which has these big word clouds of everything they've discussed in 15 hours worth of lessons. And the student's like, oh no, actually I do. Oh yeah, we talked about all of that stuff. I do know it. So that idea that it kind of imbues a bit of confidence was a really nice one, which I hadn't really thought about before.
No, I hadn't touched that, but yeah, I think we've said it time and time again. Improving people confidence is going to be half the battle, especially with the amount of schooling that they've missed from March. I can imagine that returning to this year, confidence is going to be at all-time low. Confidence in almost everything. Confidence in just the exam system as a whole. So if you can improve the confidence of at a macro level, or sort of a micro level, of them knowing what they know, yeah, that's going to be great.
Yeah, and that's what it all boils down to, really, isn't it? That's where we started, is improving that student confidence. So that's probably quite a good point to wrap up. Yeah, I know. We didn't even plan that. So I've noticed a few questions come through already, which I'll pick up. But please do now fire in any questions you've asked that haven't been answered yet, all of you attending, and we'll do our best to cover a few of them in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So I saw one come in asking about group sizes online. So it was asking, can Bramble support 1 to 3 online? Yes, that's kind of our recommended small group sizes. Works very nicely if you've got 1 tutor and 3 students. I saw actually a tutor kindly answer the question in there where they said when they do that, they just ask each student to use a different color pen, so it's easy to see who's drawing what, and then it works quite nicely. I think, Joe, have you done a mix of, in terms of online, has it been a mix of 1-to-1 and group, or has it tended to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the group, it's been both, with all the pupils on different computers in different settings, especially after lockdown, with pupils accessing this from home. Or we've even done, 3-to-1, where all the 3 pupils are using the same computer in a school library. So you've got 2 sort of different ways of doing that. I think some people might want to do larger groups. Am I right in thinking you've got a sort of more broadcasty setting that you can use?
Yeah, so I mean, this was a response to sort of the school closures piece, was trying to quickly kind of expedite development on something that would let teachers teach larger groups of students with that same interactive tool set and recording and all the rest. So yeah, we developed Bramble Broadcast for that. So if you're going over that sort of 4 or 5 students in a session, we'd recommend you use Broadcast instead. That just has slightly different audio functionality, but the same set of tools. I think in the context of the NTP, it sounds like it's going to be a lot of 1 to 3, and probably a bit of 1 to 2, and then a bit of 1-to-1. Although I guess it will depend on what schools are after as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of our application to NTP, we're asking for a percentage of it to be reserved for 1-to-1, because there are definitely pupils who require that individualized attention that would, for whatever reason, it might be that they, in a group setting, would just become disruptive, or that they would slink to the back of the group, or that they have some special educational needs that require them to just have that individualized attention. So I think it's important to keep that potential open for NTP and for any tuition. But of course, I think one of the focuses of NTP is sort of, the bang for the buck, and value for money wise, 3-to-1 is a really good ratio where you're able to have some really good progress with the pupils there. 4-to-1, 5-to-1, you're inevitably going to have 1 or 2 pupils that start shying away and not fully engaging with the tuition. And the 3-to-1, there's less place to hide, I think.
That's quite an interesting question just coming from Joni asking, have you seen any behavior issues with small groups versus 1-to-1?
We have, you have to stay on top of them, and if someone is behaving in a disruptive way, and you've got some other pupils in this group who are really keen to learn, and that privilege or that possibility is being taken away from them by someone who just seems keen on disrupting or doing anything they can to make sure that learning doesn't take place, you've got to nip that in the bud early, and that's where that relationship with the school comes in, that we're not going to be in a position to cease that happening, but you need to speak to the school and say, like, this pupil is preventing other pupils from learning. We'll give them another chance if you can sort of speak to them, but after that, I think don't feel scared to say, look, we're not going to make this available to them anymore, or they're going to have to move to 1-to-1 because it's not fair what they're doing to these other pupils.
Yeah, absolutely. Just had a question come in from Jeff asking more generally about Bramble functionality. We won't cover that today. That's a webinar in and of itself, Jeff, which we are actually running weekly. There was one yesterday. So if you email help@bramble.io, we'll be able to send you a link to that webinar recording. Similarly, a few people were asking about the tech tests and the firewall tests. Again, if you drop an email to help@bramble.io, which Lucy's handily just put in the chat there, then we can send that on to you. So you've got that to hand. So it looks like we haven't had any more questions come in, so we're probably good to wrap up there. Very efficient. We've done it in the 45 minutes.
Fantastic. Look at us go. Was there no questions further back, or?
I'm trying to scan it. I was trying to scan it and also listen at the same time, which is quite a difficult task. There's a question further up about doing your own diagnostic tests versus asking schools to do that. A bit of both, I guess. We're sort of trying to build some of that in so that you've got that option. But I guess in the past, Johnny, you've mainly worked quite closely with the schools on that.
Yeah, we've kind of always taken the stance that we don't want to waste the school's money by doing another test when they're already doing tests in school. We kind of launching that first lesson with some tuition rather than some evaluation. So, but I think if we're doing using Bramble and the school, maybe some schools are better than others. Some schools we get all that information in advance. Some schools sort of think, okay, well, we washed our hands of it and you do the tuition now. So we would probably, yeah, if we don't have the info coming in for the school that we want, then we would need to put in place our own diagnostics for the pupil. We quite often just sort of say to our tutors, like, go in with a very fairly generic sort of intermediate level synopsis and just get a feel for that pupil's ability, their confidence, how they're approaching the questions, and then use that to base on the rest of your sessions.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, on that point, good questions just coming from Julia saying, are there different skills you look for in tutors in delivering one-to-one versus small group tutoring?
In terms of the tutor, I think we probably do have tutors that would prefer one setting over the other, and I think you've got to understand the pupils as well. Are there pupils that are going to learn better in one setting over the other, one-to-one small group? We've never sort of ring-fence someone as though saying, oh, you're just a one-to-one tutor or you're a group tutor. It's not something we've delved into in the past. But yeah, one of the things we really like about our agency is the connection we have with the tutors. We don't sort of just take on anyone, and it's not sort of a pool of tutors that sort of never know the agency. We're very connected with them. We understand, you know, what it is they're looking to get out of working as a tutor, what they need, just income-wise. I think that too many agencies, it becomes a sort of just a platform where as fast as finger first gets the job, but we're there sort of saying, okay, well, we've actually turned down this tutor for the last 2 jobs and given it to someone else. We've got to make sure that we get them into something to make sure that they're keeping the roof over their head. So we know all of our tutors fairly well. We take them out for food and drinks 3 times a year. We have a reward scheme where sort of 6 to 8 that have really put the effort in each year get to go. I think, what did we do the first year? When we did a escape room, and then we went to the theatre the second year, and we're going to come up with an online reward for this year.
Yeah, not allowed to do any of those anymore.
I know. So I think we have something like a sort of online wine tasting or something like this. So I'm not sure what it's going to be. We actually let them decide. So depending on who the 6 are, we give them some options. But yeah, because of that, we know our tutors well, and there's a constant dialogue between us. So if they're feeling uncomfortable in a situation and say, look, I'm just not getting through to this group, we can pull them out and put a different tutor in. So we have that sort of, yeah, that relationship and that understanding.
Yeah, so you're able to identify when that tutor's struggling maybe in a group setting and prefers one-to-one and vice versa, I guess.
Really, yeah.
So I've seen Lucy Handley dug up a question from Sally asking about primary versus secondary. I think a lot of your work has been focused on secondary, Johnny?
We are, yeah. We've only worked with one primary school in the past. The majority of everything we do is secondary. So kicking in around year 7, and then a real focus obviously in years 10, 11, and then we do sixth form as well, so A levels for years 12 and 13. So I'm not the person to speak to about primary. I wouldn't put myself down as a professional there. But there's some fantastic agencies out there that maybe you'll want to speak to in the future about sort of primary tuition.
Yeah, I know actually next week's guest webinar is going to be talking about teaching younger students online. So that'll be a nice link into that. Actually had a great story, great feedback from one of the charities, Bookmark Reading, who started working with us at the start of the pandemic and moved all of their work online. And then, as the name suggests, it's reading, rather than tutoring. But that's all with young primary school students, and it was all delivered online. And they've said it's gone wonderfully well, and the students really like the interactivity, being able to draw on the book and all those little bits and pieces. So it's quite nice to hear those examples, both primary and secondary, working quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's space for an awful lot, in the education and the tutoring sphere, and there's going to be a lot of agencies working on NTP in order to reach the 250,000 pupils that need to be reached over this coming year. And I'm just seeing questions coming in. I did mention 16 to 19 A-level there. That's not an NTP, but there is separate funding coming in for that as well. Hopefully I look forward to sort of hearing more about engaging young pupils online as well, because that's going to be a different challenge. I mean, my experience with young people is my sort of 2-year-old and 4-year-old at home.
Might be a little too young.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not drilling them just yet.
I think, to be fair, the youngest I've heard was a 5-year-old who was being homeschooled on Bramble. So it takes all, that's for sure.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking a question for you, Andy. How do we choose which 6 to 8 tutors to reward? So I'm presuming Yolanda's got another agency that likes that idea. We just have sort of a setup of what we're expecting from a tutor. So we have regular pay rises for our tutors for doing their job very well. So if they're turning up on time and they're not asking for cover often, and they're filling in their timesheets in a punctual way. And then the 6 to 8 are the ones that really stand out, that just, when we're looking for someone to take a job, they will take a job because they like the idea of the pupil, even though it maybe means a little bit of extra journey for them, or it's not convenient for them. Those standout tutors are the ones that we're just, every time we pick up the phone, it's someone phoning up to say, hey, that tutor was really they really got through to this child who just didn't want to learn before. It's quite easy for us at the end of the year to sort of realize, okay, every single time we've heard that person's name, it's been a positive story, rather than every time I've heard that person's name, it's because they've turned up a little bit late to a lesson. So it becomes a fairly easy decision at the end of the year. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, well, I think we've covered most of the questions pretty well there. If there is anything we haven't answered, again, do drop us an email at help@bramble.io, and we'll be able to help you out. I think all that's left to say is thank you very much, Johnny, for your time. Hopefully
cheers, Rob.
No worries. Hopefully that's proved useful to everyone. Give you some insights into some of the key things you can focus on when you're working with schools, and some of the differences between online and offline delivery. As I alluded to, we're running a number of webinars throughout this autumn. So on a weekly basis, we'll have our Bramble onboarding webinars. So this is more for new users. So if any of you are new to Bramble and wanting to find out more, then I'd recommend getting along to one of those. And then we're also doing these guest webinars on a weekly basis where we really dig deep on a specific topic. And given the mood, we thought schools was a good place to start. So thank you all. Thank you, Johnny. And enjoy the rest of your days and your weekends.
Thanks, Tom. Cheers. Bye-bye.